All right, everybody. Thank you for waiting patiently. We were having some technical difficulties, so hold on. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds as the participants start coming online. Appreciate everyone's patience. Wiley, I've unmuted you. You can talk now if you unmute yourself.
Okay, Richard, I'm with you.
All right, good. You're on. Excellent. So we'll get started. Jennifer, will you kick things off?
All right. Thanks, Richard. Just want to welcome everybody to this afternoon's end of summer 2020 virtual meeting. My name is Jennifer DeBrule. I'm the Chief of Public Transportation with the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and have the honor of serving as the Vice Chair this year of MTAP. This is the fourth and final session of our end of summer virtual meeting. Big kudos to Richard and the crew at AASHTO for putting together some really meaningful sessions over the last couple of weeks. I know we're all zoomed out a little bit with webinars and video calls, but I think the content has been fantastic and it's been very timely, and I know for our agency it's been very, very helpful. So as we get ready to kick off session number 4 today, focused on statewide technology and innovation. So very, very timely and good topic for us to close with. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator for today. Wiley Brooks is with the Alabama Department of Transportation and Technology and Innovation. Zoom has given us some challenges today, but Wiley, we're really glad that you've been able to stick with it, and you and Richard have overcome those challenges, and I'm going to turn today's session over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, despite of the challenges with the technology that we have here at ALDOT, we are ready to get our session started. I would like to present a small presentation of what technology ALDOT is currently looking at. We have 2 reporting systems that we currently use, and we kind of found those to be kind of obsolete, and they were not connecting with each other. They were primarily used to for our agencies to report in their trips, the mileages, and vehicle maintenance. But there was 2 separate pieces all away from each other. So back in the latter part of 2019, we started looking at creating a program that would combine everything. We looked at a couple off-the-shelf products, and they seemed to not fit our needs. So we went and we decided we would do something that was custom-made. So we formed a partnership with the University of Alabama at Huntsville, and they came in to look over the project for us, to be the project managed the project for us, and they selected a consultant, which is Stratus. They are located here in Alabama, and they partnership with the Stone Mountain Technical Group, and now they're in the process, or actually they're in the process of producing a system that will allow us to put our grant management, as well as our collecting the quarterly data that we collect from our agencies all the way up to our NTD, and eventually it will be a system that our service civil can go out and put in their grant application to us on a yearly basis. So Richard, if you'll start the video for us, so you'll see what the product we're looking at does for.
And the product is this for the Alabama Transit Operations and Management Information Center, or Atomic?
Correct, Atomic, exactly, that's what it is.
That is the greatest acronym ever. So hold on one second. Here we go. Hopefully everyone can hear it. Hold on one second. We're having sound issues. Huh. Sorry, everyone. Not sure what the problem is with the sound, but at least check out the video while it plays.
So what you will see during your video, you'll see the various modules that our agencies can go in and file their reports. That's the one that you're looking at now is for the properties. We have agencies who build facilities, and as part of the town, collecting information for the town, we ask them to put those information in there. Now you're looking at there where they're going and make the reports for the quality reports, the different mileages and hours on the vehicles. This is a program that was presented a couple weeks ago at our annual meeting that we have each, actually it was our spring meeting, but it put it over into the month of August due to the coronavirus. And the relationship, you see that with the space rocket, of course, Alabama houses the home of the Space Center up in Huntsville, and so the space rocket just was ideal to put into this particular video. And there you see the consultant that started the program, Project Force, is Estrada, and the connection between the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and the state of Alabama.
So everybody didn't miss anything in terms of the sound. All there was music. So pretty much was summed up through by Wiley. So I'm sorry, Wiley, please continue.
So our expectation for this particular technology is big, in that we expect for it to be able to be our all-in-one inclusive type system to pick up everything we need to manage the programs here at the state of Alabama. Without any further ado, then we will turn the program over to our panelists. We have first up would be Marette Omey and Rick Olston, with the Office of Research and Innovation from the Federal Transit Administration. And there's Chris Zingler with National Center for Applied Transit Technology, or NCAT, will be our next panelist. And then Janet Risner with Michigan Department of Transportation. So Rick and Marette, without any further ado, you're all on.
All right, I think I'm on, and hello everyone. Name is Murat Omay, and I work for the research office of FTA, and today I will talk a little bit about some of the innovative technologies that we use through our grant funding opportunities in transit and the greater mobility environments. And I'm here with my colleague Rick. I'll do the first part of the presentation and I'll hand it over to him to talk about some of the programs that he leads, and he has more contribution. So in the next slide, I will also talk a little bit about some of the proactive actions that we have at FDA regarding this pandemic that we've been experiencing. And I think our acting administrator covered these topics in detail in the past sessions. And these are all information that are available publicly on our website. But this is our approach to recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. And it is we are taking a leadership position to provide proactive technical assistance to the agencies in need and develop a bunch of resources for the agencies. And in the next slide, I have the websites of those resources that I mentioned. And you can see we have a discussion forum, we have a resource tool, and we have an FAQ from the grantees that have been submitted and answered by our teams. And finally, we have a recovery listening sessions that focus on certain topics, and that's been going on for the last several months now. And in the next slide, you can see the past sessions and a little bit more information about it. So, you know, if you go to that website, you will find out there are some past sessions revolving around topics that were immediately needed to be discussed. And there are recordings there, you can listen to them. And these are the upcoming sessions in September, October, November, and December. And if it continues, obviously you can monitor the progress in these, you know, in this website. So that being said, I will move on to some of the, in the next slide, I will talk a little bit about some of the programs that we have at our research office. And this is by no means a comprehensive presentation regarding all of these, but I want to mention some of the you know, important programs that we have that involve technology and innovation. And hopefully, if anyone in the audience is interested to follow up on any of these programs or how they worked or lessons learned or how they can be more involved, my colleague Rick and I are available for any of the follow-on sessions. So we have a mobility on demand program, which was the most mature program, and I will talk about it a little bit. And then as a spin-off from that learning experience / program, we have the integrated mobility innovation and accelerating innovative mobility programs that followed it. And my colleague Rick is going to talk in detail about those. And we do have a payment integration program that is not only looking at integrating the payment options for transit operations, but also private sector mobility providers such as Ubers and Lyfts and what have you, and other transportation adjacencies such as parking and tolling and you know, anything that you can imagine that could be attributable to transportation. And hopefully in the next phases, it will also include non-transportation providers such as retail and credit cards and what have you. And then we have a strategic transit automation research program that is started several years ago, and that is being led within our office. And in this current phases, they are rolled in to the IMI and AIM programs. So you don't see a separate advertisement for the STAR program for funding, but they are, you know, STAR program, NPI program are part of the IMI and AIM Notice of Funding Opportunities. And finally, we have an Accessible Transportation Technologies Research Initiative, ATRI, and this has been going on for a very long time. And under that program, we develop technologies, and my colleague is gonna talk about that in a second. And besides our office, which the acronym is TRI-10, we have the TRI-20, which is the office that is responsible more on the infrastructure and safety and asset innovation side of things. And you can see a list of the programs here, from real-time transit infrastructure to bus testing programs to safety research. And that office is led by our colleague Mohammed Yusuf. And if anybody is interested in any of those programs, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to connect you to Mohammed and his team that is working on these programs. So in the next slide, I want to make the connection that we mentioned COVID-19 and we mentioned innovation and technology. And it was very interesting to observe this. Many of the technologies or solutions that we were developing or that were being developed under our programs were also directly or indirectly linked to some of the issues that we have been experiencing with COVID-19. For example, we have a mobility performance metrics initiative that is looking at customer or traveler-centric performance measurement strategies. And with that, we took that opportunity to redefine value. In this case, transit agencies' value is typically measured by the ridership that they provide, to the people, to travelers. But in this case, as you all would observe, there's some food delivery or packet delivery or other external services that are not typically attributed to transit that was taking place. So we started kind of looking into it and seeing like, what do we say when we say value to a person? Maybe a person is not taking a bus service, but their food is being delivered by the bus service. So there is a value. How do we capture that kind of approach? And then the AIM and AMI projects, in particular, were exploring areas of cashless and contactless payment options, which we all know that is very important for the operators not touching any of the fare media, and people not touching the fare collectors and what have you. So that immediately became relevant to the pandemic and the conditions that it created. Integrated payment options, as we all know, the transit service kind of stalled a little bit, or maybe in your areas you've seen the private service providers such as Ubers and Lyfts not being able to provide those services. So having some sort of an integration from the payment and planning and scheduling perspective was also crucial for some folks who wanted to get to work and other activities. And we're also looking at use of technology for contact tracing. So there are some projects that were proposed under our programs to do that. Technology integration for right sizing. For instance, some folks were saying, well, if we're going to have not this amount of ridership, then what can we do to optimize our routing and scheduling and service delivery so that we don't have to use the resources or waste resources and things in that nature. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about our the program. These are the programs that I mentioned, but one thing in particular that I want everyone's attention is in the middle. We have the mobility innovation and complete trip, and I try to highlight that because that is kind of in the core of everything that we do. And in a second, I'm going to explain that in detail. But in general, what that means is it is breaking a trip that was conventionally described as from point A to point B, as if there is nothing in between. That has been the traditional approach from public transportation perspective, and other modes as well. But in our office, we break it down into many segments, from the time that you're planning to the trip to the point that you are planning for it, you're scheduling it, you're waiting for the trip, and you're accessing the bus stop or the transit station house that possible, and what have you. So it has many subcomponents, and our goal is to address the barriers of each of those components so that a trip is possible for everyone. So in other words, if one of those components is not possible, then it's not going to be possible. So we pay attention to that in the program structuring process. And for instance, you see here we have standards and policies. People with limitations, for instance. How do we address that? There is no two separate systems that is providing service for them, and how do we address some of those barriers so that the entire fixed route system and the greater mobility system is accessible for everyone, right? And then we have a ton of stakeholder engagement to understand the needs and to also understand what the industry is doing, so that we are not redundant and we stay relevant with everything that we do. So in the next slide, I will kind of zoom into this complete trip concept or the vision, as some of us say. As you can see, a trip has many steps from the planning to the traveling to the station to using the station and understanding the real-time information that is given to you if the station is equipped with that type of technology. Boarding to the vehicles and is the vehicle accessible to the person's specific needs. Using the vehicle, what are the instructions there, and then some of the vehicles, they do have real-time information, or you can use your own mobile device to kind of get information about your surroundings. Is it possible within the vehicle? Do they provide that service, or do they enable that service? And how do you use the other simple features of such as leaving the vehicle and making sure that, if the technology allows, that your transfer is waiting there for you. And also the, some of the transferring options and enabling. And actually in this picture, there's one element that is missing, and I'm gonna let my colleague Rick to kind of jump in quickly if he doesn't mind.
Sure, Murad, thanks very much. Yeah, this this graphic is missing something in the sense of confidence, right? So the very belief on the part of a traveler, or we should say a would-be traveler, that the trip they want to make is in the first place possible. And a very important part of what we see as the barriers to the complete trip that we're looking to address through our various programs is that initial stage of saying, yes, it's possible for me, given whatever limitations I might have, or where I live, or where I want to go, to make that trip. So all that we've done in trying to demonstrate, for example, more responsive paratransit style services for folks who require that kind of service, is that you can take more than one trip in a day, for example, or in the ability to provide some level of useful service in less dense types of communities, so that people can have the feeling that they can make that trip. And once you've had that confidence, then we're continuing to sort of build that process out and that barrier reduction process out, looking at things like Murat has pointed to in terms of letting people know how you pay your fare and where you'll travel, some of that familiarization too with the route you'll take. So it's a very important component to the overall vision, the idea that people feel like they can make a trip and they have the confidence to do that in an independent sort of fashion. So thanks very much, Murat, for letting me jump in there. We'll have to one day change the graphic, right?
Well, actually, we should leave it like this, because this is something that is nice to bring everybody's attention for something that doesn't exist in this graphic. So thank you for jumping in. So basically, that is our complete trip vision, and this was developed for the ATRI program that we have. Considering some people with limitations and all that, but then it was very much accepted and embraced by the transportation community. Now we apply these principles to pretty much everything that we do. So that being said, I'm gonna jump into the next slide, Richard, if you don't mind, and talk about this program a little bit, Mobility on Demand, because this is one of our mature programs now. So some of the the challenges we have with the newer programs is we don't know the results. We have not evaluated them yet. So we're kind of testing different technologies and innovative ideas or concepts. But this one, we did test these implementation or demonstrations rather for the past several years. They were planned, they were implemented, they were tested, fine-tuned, and then we have final project reports and evaluation reports that kind of provide a ton of information about the challenges that these people went through from the developer side, from the implementer side, and from the policy side of things. And these reports that are available in this link that I provided there, you have to kind of search through it and understand, to look for them. They're not listed under MOD, but if you kind of type in a keyword, it would probably return some results about these 11 projects that we had awarded. And these reports have all the data, the information, and the contact information if you're interested to get in touch with them, or you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to do the introductions. But I can't always have the time to talk about all 11 projects evaluation results. So, I picked one randomly to demonstrate what you might find in these reports, and I hope that it would be beneficial. And many of these reports, when I was putting the presentation together, jokingly, my team was saying, "Well, this is good reading for people who are taking some, break while working home during this unfortunate times." So in the next slide, you'll see the one that I picked was from DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit in Texas. And so they facilitate a collaboration between a microtransit provider and TNC, Uber, and their fixed route transit service. And so, the idea was to kind of expand the network without making it redundant and without spending too much of the resources. And they kind of sat down and planned this out and said there are some areas that we can cover, but we cannot really allocate the resources there because the demand is not there. So what can we do? So that's when the private sector partnership came into place. And they ran the numbers and they said, you know what, this seems feasible. Let's go to FDA and ask for a grant to see if we can demonstrate this feasibility of this. So we're glad that they did, because they had goals. They increased the ridership on their system because they allocated their resources more targeted, in a more targeted fashion. And they lowered the cost per passenger because, some of the services they outsourced was for paratransit services. And, the numbers are, they were spending about $27 per trip, which dropped down to $3 and some change. That's a significant cost saving for the agency. And as long as the provider, the outsourced provider, is happy with the way it works, that is a tremendous savings for the agency. And obviously the travel and wait times improved. And then overall customer satisfaction improved as well. You can find this report if you're interested to read on this link. But I want to highlight a few things in the next slide that were part of the success. These were successful, but there are also challenges, right? So with every technology implementation projects, we have challenges. And one of them was the use of technology is new to users and to the transit environment. So it required some training for the users to get used to it and to build confidence on the system that a private sector provider is going to provide the same reliable service to the users, to the customers, and obviously a strong backup support system, because this is not say a real-time information system that it fails, then it doesn't have the dire consequences as if a system that is saying that you will get a trip or you will have a ride and not providing the ride. So that type of system backup was very important. So what they have done as a solution to those demands or those challenges is they have intensive marketing campaigns, and they provided incentives, and they upgraded their systems to have this robust backup system. So you can find the details like these in the report. The other part was integrating the DART system with the private sector providers from the policy perspective, because both entities have different objectives, right? The private sector is more concerned about the profits versus the public sector is concerned about the service. So how do you harmonize those policy objectives? And obviously their solution was to sit down around the table and to modify some of their policies and ask the private sector providers to modify their policies and harmonize those policies so that there are some agreements about the data sharing and what have you. And I think that the slides are not there. Okay.
Sorry, everyone. For whatever reason, I lost you. So Murat, give me a second.
Sure. Yeah.
Were you at DART or were you at IMI?
Yeah, we were at DART. So yeah, in this case, as I mentioned, this is just a simple example of what these grants and programs that we have provide. It is a testing bed for many of the innovations and technologies that you might have in mind, or your agencies within your state might have in mind. And what we do is we ask them to be aware of the feasibility of what they're trying to do and come to us and present their cases during the snowfalls and get the funding and work with us and be agile enough to make the necessary modifications, because these are research and demonstration projects. These are not implementations. So there's a lot of to be learned about these projects, and we expect the applicants to be as agile as possible so that they can navigate through these challenges and barriers as they come across those challenges. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Rick to talk about one of the newer programs that we have, and he is leading those programs, at least one of them, and that would give you more ideas about what type of technologies or what type of solutions that you're talking about.
Thanks, thanks very much, Murat. So, Richard, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, where we're going to talk a little bit about the Integrated Mobility Innovation Demonstration Program. But before I get very deeply into IMI, I want to just make a couple of points about what Murat was saying in terms of our research under Mobility on Demand a few years ago, kind of at that stage back in 2016 when a lot of our agencies were first making that entree into conversations about how service in a broad sense could be improved in a range of innovations and partnerships with private sector entities in utilizing data systems and APIs and integrating the ability to discover trips across different types of modes. And I think one of the most important outcomes from the Mobility on Demand effort has been simply to prove that many of those innovative ideas are feasible. And not only are they feasible, but we have understood that service can be provided in a way that is equitable, that we can serve all of our customers, that we can provide, for example, the trip that's usable by someone who uses a wheelchair, that we can make these innovative services available to folks who are unbanked or underbanked. And that was a very key part of the sort of foundation that we set with Mobility on Demand some years ago. We took that learning, took those lessons, and thought, what is the next frontier in mobility innovation? And to bring you back for a second to that visual, I'm going into space here a little bit, next frontier, right? That constellation visual that Murat showed earlier with the orbiting parts of our work, right? The various programs. He mentioned that we've integrated those into IMI, and you'll see that. We're looking through IMI at what can we do to take what we've learned in the development of new service models under Mobility on Demand, as we were just talking about, and how do we layer into that the potential to really make some further advancements into payment integration, breaking down barriers to someone new, for example, entering into a system, and you've traveled somewhere and you have no idea how to get fare, and so you never think of riding the bus that might pass outside your hotel room when hotel rooms were a thing. But you create opportunity there, and so we thought, how can we bring that payment system up to speed to meet these expectations for person-responsive mobility, and then what too can we do to look further into the future under our STAR plan, under our Transit Automation Research Plan, to see what new services could be provided, what more efficiencies could be brought into systems, and how can we also increase safety. So we look through IMI, and we've been happy to been able to fund 24 projects to the tune of, this number of $23 million. It blows my mind to think that we have such an investment. We started off with less, but we saw such value in the projects. We have a suite of projects which are described on the site listed here that are really helping us to understand how those types of innovations can be brought together as a complete whole in the frame of this complete trip vision, so that as communities are exploring one component of this challenge, we're working with them to see, how can you build in other parts of that trip making experience to solve the problems that we've identified as part of the complete trip. So looking at financing and partnerships and payment solutions across a broad range. And I'm actually very happy to see my friends from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation on the line too. It'll be my pleasure to work with you all on your microtransit demonstration effort. You know what I'll do, Richard? Let's go ahead to the next slide as well. All right. And so I'll make one additional point before I get into this latest newly announced program from last week only, I believe, that we announced the selections under AIM. The integrated mobility innovation effort has a very firm footing in this concept that Murat has spoken about too, in universal equitable access. And we're requiring the projects there to develop an equity and accessibility plan that is going to look very discreetly at both how you can resolve those barriers that we talk about when we discuss the complete trip, but also doing that in a way that provides for a strong amount of public feedback and involvement in system design. We see any of our innovation efforts, especially given the difficult times we find ourselves now in terms of the COVID-19 public health emergency, the ability to be engaged in conversation with the public that we're wishing to serve, and to respond to a iterative need to develop our projects is one that we're really pushing our programs to move forward with us in. And so we're looking to take those lessons that are going to be learned from our partnerships with IMI and move them into AIM, so that we can show how to make the greatest value for all travelers in all types of communities. And so that all travelers in all types of communities, I think, is a really strong underlining point for this latest investment in accelerating innovative mobility. There's very much a realization that since we have shown in these 5 years of research from our office the potential for these mobility on demand and innovative solutions to work, what can we now do to spread the value of these innovations across all types of communities and across this country? So you'll see that we've been able to fund 25 projects in 24 states and 1 territory under Accelerating Innovative Mobility. And a key component of this is going to be this AIM Incubator Program, and the first of which will be selected from among the recipients of AIM funding. And this is a knowledge sharing exercise, a knowledge sharing system that we're developing in partnership with some of our technical assistance partners across FTA's offices. Again, realizing that we live in such a changing time, it's vitally important, we feel, for our stakeholders to know, what challenges are being come against by our partner agencies, and what solutions are they in real time implementing to overcome those. We have managed with Mobility on Demand, for example, to overcome difficult questions around data sharing and the provision of wheelchair accessible service, or technological systems integration. We face now a whole new level of challenges, a whole new range of challenges. We are going to be working very closely with all of our projects, all of the communities with which we're working, to engage all of the transit agencies across the country and state DOTs as well, and all of the stakeholders with a part in ensuring that we are doing the best we can to provide for complete trips for people, to understand what barriers can these kinds of innovations address, and how can we continue to move our mobility system forward. Murat has spoken a little bit about our looking at new metrics as well, but how do we capture the value of those investments indeed as well. So forgive my philosophical rant here for a moment, but I think it's important to acknowledge, as Murat did earlier on in discussing how we are responding to the COVID emergency, um, the, um, the challenge that our industry faces, and to point out that we are doing the most we can to provide a knowledge base and a system for resolving challenges that we can to all of you and to all of our stakeholders. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide if we could. So Murat has mentioned the ATRI program, Accessible Transportation Technology Research Initiative. I am not the most technically minded person on our team, so I may bounce this back to Murat to discuss in greater detail some of our solutions. But if you think back to the complete trip graphic and understanding in a very discrete way the kinds of challenges that a traveler would come across in making their trip, we did the same, and we looked at under ATRI, what can we do to resolve challenges at every step of this process, from getting on a vehicle, getting from your door, in fact, of the beginning of your trip to the vehicle, knowing which vehicle to board, safely crossing streets, safely interacting in the streetscape, navigating indoors in a complex transit setting. And we've developed some very interesting and fascinating tools and technologies that we feel can reduce those barriers. We're happy to see that these have been successful in their demonstration phases, and we're really looking for communities to step forward to partner with us to show how these tools, when implemented in real life situations in a community that's thinking about the complete trip and the potential for the resolution of those barriers to make a difference to the economic and physical and well-being of their community and its people. We want those partnerships to help us understand what can we do, how can we leverage technologies in this space to really move us toward that vision that we keep talking about of complete trips for all. So Murat, before I sort of gloss over the specifics of the technologies, was there anything in particular you wanted to point out in terms of our recent work here?
I think in the interest of time, I won't get into the details of everything, but sorry, my camera went off. But one thing that I can mention is that we do have these navigation technologies, which seems to be, in the forefront of all of these technologies that we develop. So, that is one takeaway that I have among all the technologies that we develop. That navigation is very important because people are realizing that how do you access a station or a stop, bus stop, or any other transportation facility or any other facility in general is important when it comes to people who are facing mobility challenges and what have you, because many of the off-the-shelf or commercially available navigation technologies leave out this accessibility portion of this routes that they develop. So that's one thing that I want to highlight. The rest of it, if anybody's interested, I'll be happy to have a one-on-one conversation with the details of the technologies. But I just wanted to highlight that navigation is kind of on the top of the list of the technologies that we developed. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Matt. I appreciate that. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide then, if we could, Richard. And what else was I going to talk about? Yeah, the fun stuff. How to be involved with us. And we've listed here how to be involved in ATRI, but I think it's generally speaking how to be involved in our work, trying to remove, as I said, barriers to mobility for everybody. So the first thing is we are looking to launch in the not too distant future a Mobility Innovation Industry Forum. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to engage stakeholders from academia, from the private sector. We want to look at technologists and sort of the whiz kids of the technology development sector to understand what are the barriers that people face. And by the way, I should mention too the very heavy involvement from users of mobility systems themselves. But what are the barriers that people face? How can those barriers be addressed in currently ongoing developments, whether they come from, again, the private or the academic sector or what have you? And then what barriers are unlikely to be addressed in those kinds of forms of development that require government action? So when we can move forward in additional prototype development, for example, that we can focus the government's action on those areas that's going to make the greatest impact to the removal of those barriers to the complete trip. I'd like you to read one day, if you're interested, the report of an online dialogue that we held some months ago in partnership with the Department of Labor on barriers and solutions to complete trips. And if you don't want to read it, I'll tell you this one point in brief, although when you have the time, I'd suggest it. We've been talking about pretty fascinating and cutting edge, I hope you would think them cutting edge, solutions to challenges. Those are very useful and they have a lot of promise, but I don't want to forget the value in many of the very sort of basic barriers that people face. And I'm referring to something so basic as the existence of a sidewalk, the existence of a safe and comfortable place to wait for a bus, or a ticket vending machine that is at a height that's appropriate for someone who might be using a wheelchair. We had lots of comments from the public about those types of barriers, and I would be remiss not to say that I hadn't thought necessarily about the fact that there's not a standard for the height of those kinds of machines. So I would urge all of you, when you're thinking about investments, if you're thinking about investments in barrier reduction and service provision in the frame that we're asking you to do in this complete trip concept, do think too about the basic kinds of solutions that can mean so much to folks. I would reference, for example, the broad flexibility that exists under our 5310 program to do all manner of interesting things under the umbrella of mobility management, or in the provision of alternatives to public transportation that serve folks with disabilities and older adults. There's a great deal of flexibility there to do things in even the pedestrian and cycle access kind of frame that I would encourage, that I would suggest have a very strong amount of potential to benefit folks' mobility, as has some of these new solutions that we've talked about in this presentation. So then, to get back a little bit to the whiz-bang sort of stuff, our online dialogue for AVs and the potential here to have autonomous vehicles and that promise for folks who now are having very difficult times getting from point A to B as they need to be served by this emerging realm of AVs. We think there's a great potential here, especially to help people with disabilities. And I'm wondering if Richard is telling me to move on quickly. Yeah. I'd also, I'll close things up a little bit, and perhaps Marat wants to cut in with something else before I completely close. But let me just say again, please look for our contact information, which is a few slides further. Be in touch with us about, we're looking for strategic partnerships. We're looking for folks, as I said, to help us to demonstrate our technologies. And please be in touch and see where you are envisioning your community going in the implementation of new solutions and how we can help in that. So thank you very much, everybody.
Murat, do we lose you?
No. Well,
Yeah, I mean, this is just our contact information, and in the interest of time, I think we should wrap up and move on to the next presentation, right?
Wiley? All right, I think Wiley having difficulty muting. Our next presenter is Chris Seilinger from the National Center for Applied Transit Technology at CTAA. And kick it away, Chris.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all from the comforts of our various Zoom-based locations. First of all, I'll do a little apology. As some of you might have heard from me a couple of days ago, it seems to be infrastructure week outside my home office window. So hopefully the pavement removal equipment that's out there won't get too loud, but if it does, we'll just soldier on. So first of all, I will say that I wear a number of hats at the Community Transportation Association of America. One of them is I am part of the staff team for the National Center for Applied Transit Technology, and it's under that hat that I'm with you all today, although it does overlap with a lot of other things that I'm doing in my CTA portfolio. So let's go on to the next slide. So just real quickly, NCAT, as we call it, is it's a technical assistance center that CTA operates in partnership and with funding from the Federal Transit Administration. We're through the Office of Program Management. Started up late last year and doing a bunch of nifty stuff. So let's go on to the next slide. Basically, we're getting in at NCAT, we're getting into the weeds of how can we best help small urban, rural, and tribal transit agencies really do what they need to do technologically. So we kind of take a lot of the lofty stuff and the innovative stuff that you've heard about from Rick and Murat, and kind of crosswalking that with what actually is happening and needed in the field. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and give you whet your appetites for a little bit more to come. But first of all, to channel my inner Richard Price here, I'll remind you that if anything comes up during the course of what I'm saying or what you heard from Rick and Murat or what you'll be hearing afterwards from Michigan DOT, please enter those things in the Q&A box, and they will be seen, and as time permits, they will be responded to. So, but anyhow, let's move on to the next slide. So what I'm going to be talking about today is stuff that's gleaned from some research that's been done for us by Foursquare Integrated Transportation Partners, a Maryland-based consulting firm. They've been putting together a guide for us called the Promising Practices Guidebook on Transit Technology Adoption. That whole guide is going to be, I'm giving my final edits to that guide practically as we speak. Literally, it's like on my screen. If I get distracted, because I'm editing that. But it'll be out next month in October. And stay tuned. If you're on our email list, you'll be getting notified about an October 15th webinar. We'll be talking more in details about that. But in doing that, we're really looking to see what's happening in the field. Trying to see, well, the innovative stuff that's seeded with demonstration or research money is really cool, really important, really cutting edge, leading edge stuff. But then how do we mainstream this stuff, and how is it being mainstreamed, and what are we learning from things that are actually in place? So we found, and when I say we, this is largely the consultant team I had working for me on this, found a number of key ingredients. On to the next slide. Which is that when you're looking at stuff that's actually happening kind of at the street level, yes, we're looking for stuff that's innovative, but also we're looking for things that aren't just isolated one-offs, but can be replicated other places, whether it's among multiple grantees in your state or across multiple transit agencies or what have you. We're looking for things that don't have to be 100% scalable, but at least somewhat scalable to fit different situations, because again, the one-off things, sometimes it's important to note their success, but also note what makes something a one-off success versus a scalable, replicable success. We look at cost effectiveness to say, are you getting a return on investment? Is the money you're spending on the technology, yielding benefits that exceed in value what you're spending on it? I can, as probably any of you all could probably chime in yourselves, offer innumerable examples of cases where a whole lot of money was spent on something that yielded very little results or was super expensive to keep going. Usability and accessibility are very important attributes. We're looking at innovations that, first of all, that the user themselves, in this case, for our audience here today, that might be your provider network, your grantees, your subrecipients, that they know what they're doing and they're capable of using what's being given to them. For things that are customer facing, public facing, we're also, or even for things that are maybe internal, we're also looking at things like accessibility. I continue to be amazed on the technological front, what Rick had just noted on things in terms of kind of interface fronts of like how easy it is to not give proper consideration to 508 compliance with respect to technology, looking at assistive technologies and so forth. So that accessibility component actually is pretty large because it's very easy to talk about technology as the great liberator and equalizer and mainstreamer, including for folks with disabilities or with language barriers or and so forth. But it's also very easy to inadvertently shut the door on folks, even as we think we're being innovative. So that accessibility part is actually pretty important. We are looking at technology that actually improves efficiency. Again, I've seen a number of negative examples of things that technology investment actually led to more work and less productivity, especially on the operations front. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's very easy to kind of spend more hours carrying out the technology than if you just went back to the low-tech stuff. So that gets on to our next point, which is it really needs to improve some aspect of performance. It gets back to a big part of what you're hearing from, again, hearing from what Murat and Rick were sharing is like, if you're going to invest in technology, or if your grantees are going to invest in technology, it really needs to achieve something and not just be shiny and new. It really has to achieve something that you can measure that is actually a demonstrable improvement. It doesn't always have to be dollars and cents. It doesn't always have to be throughput of more passengers on the vehicle, but there's got to be some measurable improvement in performance. And to go along with that, there's got to be some level of risk reduction. It's got to actually be making things better and not worse. Again, I've seen examples where something was tried out that as a demonstration that really ended up not working. We're looking for things that actually, kind of make things better, more secure. There's a whole aspect of transit technology we often don't think about, which is looking at our back office functions. But as we take care of more financial stuff and more integration with healthcare systems and so forth, there's some cybersecurity risks that need to be reduced and not have things that actually open you up to more risk because you're trying to integrate too many things and not looking at firewalls and security and so forth. The other thing is to really look at the life cycle cost of technology. This was a notion that really fascinates me because in one of my other hats as CTA, looking at federal policy stuff, I look at how, as a side note, one of the big challenges when the CARES Act was passed in March of this year was trying to get state unemployment insurance systems to recalibrate to provide a different benefit and also to provide benefits to folks that were not previously salaried or hourly workers. And discovering that a lot of these state unemployment systems were still using mainframe computers, not with punch cards, but still 1960s technologies. And there's this big call for COBOL language computer programmers to parachute into state labor agencies and try to recode their systems. And COBOL, like most of you on this phone, COBOL was the programming language that was in place when your parents were children. So it was really way back there. So looking at the lifespan to realize that today's technology, tablet computers, for instance, a lot of us are putting tablets on our rolling stock and so forth, typically have a lifespan of maybe a year, maybe a year and a half. Most desktop computers, again, a 2 or 3 year lifespan. Software can last a little bit longer with upgrades and so forth, but still, we're talking about things with a relatively brief, ephemeral lifespan. So how are we looking at cost recovery? And again, when does it make sense to really kind of get your money's worth within the lifespan of it? And is what you're getting sustainable beyond the lifespan of what you're doing? So again, thinking about how you make that transition from a demonstration project into an ongoing sustainable part of your system. So for us, it's really key to really look at things that are mainstreamed and embedded in the thing. So we were looking at technologies that actually none of them were being used anymore with demonstration funds. It was all regular use of ongoing formula FTA funds or ongoing local dollars or things like that to make sure that this is actually being embedded in mainstream. So we observed a number of trends. On to the next slide. So we saw that for technological adoption to be both cool and also really promising, there is some level of incrementalism. Maybe it's huge leaps and bounds. Maybe it's little baby steps, but it's building on something. It's not just let's trash everything and start from scratch. It's really incremental progress. Typically, we saw the most promising things were using some level of off-the-shelf technologies. Maybe there's things that are kind of used in different ways, just as something we probably don't even think about anymore. No one thought that when the first iPads and Android-based tablet computers came out, that we were then looking at the new driver-passenger interface that could basically replace many aspects of the fare box and the radio and things like that. But lo and behold, that's what we did. Our partners in the private sector, whether in the Ubers, Lyfts, the other TNCs of the world, they've shown us that the off-the-shelf smartphone is actually a critical ingredient towards technological adoption. So that kind of stuff is actually something to worth. Don't take it for granted, but pay attention to that. We saw that interoperability was big, and again, we're looking at things that were systems, thinking back to Wiley's presentation of the atomic system that's been rolled out in Alabama, of saying, how can we get systems to talk to each other, not talk past each other? I'll just do another side note. My first job in transit was around a software improvement where basically I was having to train a bunch of people to take data that was in one system and manually rekey all of it into another system. Total waste of technology if we were doing that today. It was the only choice available in the 1980s. So let's look at interoperability. Speaking of which, the next thing that we observed was that be very, very, very careful if you're doing wholesale systems integration. I will just offer as a cautionary note that if you're trying to integrate too many disparate software platforms, then one of them becomes obsolete and has an upgrade and the upgrade doesn't talk to everything else you've got, you're stuck. You're going to be like those COBOL programmed unemployment systems in the 1960s. The technology has upgraded itself, but they couldn't get the interoperability, the integration to upgrade with it. So be very careful. We've really seen results-oriented trends of looking at things that actually have some benefit attached to them. Again, this reinforces what you've heard from Rick and Murat to say it's got to benefit maybe internal customers. Maybe we're improving back office functions, in-house functions. Maybe we're streamlining the efficiency of of how vehicles are rolling out on the street. Maybe we're streamlining the maintenance function, or maybe we're benefiting our external customers by having a more user-friendly customer interface. And then finally, what we observed on a trend is that things work best when you're adopting technology for a reason, not just because it's the shiny new thing. It's very easy to go to conferences, to read things, to be roaming around online and see really nifty stuff that catches your eye, catches your attention. Note those things, but then before you adopt anything in your state or before your grantees actually do anything, have a reason for adopting it. So let's go on to getting into some examples that we found. And I'm going to be really quick. This is going to be like lightning round stuff because naturally I'm halfway doing a promotional pitch for something that you'll be able to read and hear about in greater length next month. But we've seen in this guide, we're profiling 10 practices. A couple of them are fairly well known among us, and we might be hearing more even today about some of this stuff. There have been some really nifty things happening with Michigan's Mobility Challenge, which may or may not be what Jan was going to talk about in a few minutes. There's been a lot of very good press, good play about the Go Vermont initiative involving GTFS Flex and some other stuff statewide in Vermont. Super cool, user-friendly platform to help Vermonters or would-be Vermonters or passing through Vermonters to best get from point A to point B anywhere within the state of Vermont. We've seen some nifty things. I think this started with one of the demo grants that Rick had mentioned in Chattanooga as just one example among many of integration of accessible wayfinding with the transit interface. Really cool. We've seen a back office, some really neat things involving integrating your transit asset management system with the actual day-to-day reality of maintenance management. We're profiling an example from Flagstaff, Arizona on that. There are innumerable examples of microtransit. But still it's relatively new, relatively can be thought of as a promising practice. We profiled one from Johnson County, Kansas, because we had to pick one at least to profile. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, which is kind of evolving even as we speak, is looking at mobile fare payment. And again, Murat and Rick mentioned this kind of technology out there. It's slowly becoming mainstream. We've got a few cool examples about that. One actually that is really cool, so cool we profiled it. Luckily, one of the researchers actually spoke French because the place where it's involved was in the French-speaking part of rural Quebec. But basically integrating AVL, trip planning stuff, and fare payment all in one kind of fairly seamless platform. There's like really cool, totally off-the-shelf stuff, nothing customized about it, other than this kind of pretty much ready to deliver platform. The company that they're using, that particular company is based in France, so you might have some issues if you're trying to procure it, but I think these days we can buy French software easier than Chinese software. I don't know for sure. But the approach is one that other software platforms could easily put together and integrate for us. But the key thing there is the contactless fare payment using smartphones or other mobile platforms. The other thing is, of course, we're seeing electrification and even other uses of alternative fuels. There's nothing new about alternative fuels, like even with the natural gas alternatives out there. That's not new. Electric buses on the transit coach level, they're still relatively new, but it's a fairly proven technology, but we're seeing how that's becoming mainstream. And again, we're looking at things like saying, all right, when and how are you going to be electrifying your bus fleet? I've talked to a number of urban transits, some rural transits that have their goal to be 100% non-diesel, non-gasoline in their fuel systems. So there's some things happening out there that again are really cool. I'll go quickly. And if you have questions about this stuff, throw them in the chat box. And I'm speaking fast so we can elaborate on anything you want to elaborate on. But I was thinking, as Murat had mentioned in the FTA slide presentation, of how is the current pandemic changing things. So there's some things that are coming up and some practices in place that sort of crept into our promising practices guide. So let's look at the next slide. And this is where you're getting a slightly structured Chris Eilinger rant, but I'm trying to be constructive about this. First of all, thanks to the pandemic, no one wants to handle money. And for the transit workforce safety, health and safety, we're trying to maintain distance between the vehicle operators and the passengers. On a large transit coach, a lot of transit systems, went to backdoor boarding and so forth. But in any case, we're trying to minimize, basically, folks would love it if we just did away with the whole fare box as a choke point on the bus for health reasons, for security reasons, for innumerable reasons. So we're seeing a lot of transit systems are kind of accelerating their use of mobile payments or going to things, sort of borrowing from the TNC world of using advanced reservations or other things in a demand response system, which of course, there's nothing new in demand response transit about advanced reservations. That's the way we've been doing it since forever. But really making that kind of current and modern, but really saying, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. So that, again, we can minimize the contact between the passengers and the drivers. So related to that, we saw, of course, especially in the first few months of the pandemic, transit systems large and small going fare free because they weren't having anyone near any fare boxes. And I'll be honest, no one has found the actual handling of currency as a vector of this disease, although there has been a lot of research that if you were to do some kind of microbial analysis on paper money, that stuff is crawling with all kinds of germs. I mean, seriously, most of which won't kill you unless you've got a compromised immune system. But still, we're just trying to go cashless, going fare free. Many of you have heard me go on my slight diversion for a lot of smaller transit systems. They've found that they were spending more money counting cash than they were getting at the fare box. So again, sometimes there's an economic reason to go fare free. And so forth. But when you see even large transit systems like Kansas City making a big splash all over the transit media for going fare free, it's something at least that's been thinking about. We're starting to see not so much mainstream in transit, unless some of you want to chime in the Q&A box with examples from your state of public transit systems doing this, but the technology allows that many of your providers are using could, with minimal modification, actually allow them to do what Greyhound has done, what Amtrak has done, what the airlines have, of course, have done, with the exception of Southwest Airlines, since forever, of actually specifying seats. Easy peasy way to maintain capacity constraints if you need that for health reasons, social distancing if you need that for health reasons, to basically say, you're sitting there, you're sitting there, you're sitting there. Technology allows it. If I can take a Bolt bus or Megabus or one of those and reserve my seat, take a Greyhound bus, and I think Greyhound allows seat reservations, then you can do that in public transit. The technology's out there. No worries. We've also seen, looking at ways to look at your passenger databases, have your providers do that, because in those places with that where there are outbreaks of this, or there I hate to say this, but there will be other communicable disease outbreaks. There have been in the past, there will be in the future, is to look at your passenger databases and say, all right, if we need to do contact tracing, can we do that with the data that we have in our database? Or can we recognize that this will be one use of our database? The other thing, and this is certainly happening, we've heard from CTA and others that there's a big push to look at vehicle technologies, especially around things like minimizing surfaces, better airflow, these kinds of stuff, looking at seating configurations. So because as I think was mentioned in the Q&A box earlier, and was kind of alluded in Rick and Murat's presentation, that part of what we need to do in public transit, and this is one of our jobs at the state level and at the local level, and for folks like us at CTA and our counterparts at AASHTO and APTA at the national level, is to realize that whether we like it or not, the thorny situation is that a lot of folks in the public are uncomfortable with public transit, mostly based on stereotype. I mean, there's been, once we've practiced social distancing, there's been very little proven instances where public transit was the vector by which COVID-19 was passed from one person to another. Yes, it happened in the early days before we did distancing with passenger to passenger and passenger to driver interactions, but we moved past that, and we're really, it's not happening, but still people feel very concerned, just as many folks in the public feel concerned, inordinately, in my mind, concerned about their own safety and security on public transit. Let's just make sure that we're ahead of the curve, that we're designing vehicles, putting service out on the street, that our grantees are doing this, that folks in our community are going to be actually pleased and satisfied with. So there are a few things we need to work on. So the next slide is the final part of my rant, and then I will go back to less rant-prone dialogue here, monologue, is that something that I've heard, and pardon me for the play on words here, countless times, is that most transit systems were using the fare box to do their passenger counts. Well, that's fine, but what if you don't have a fare box? And so there is passenger counting technology out there. But what I've heard from the field is, for whatever reasons, and I don't know these reasons, it's not very reliable. So we need to somehow improve that, because thank goodness our FTA formula grants don't pay us on the basis of ridership, but still that's the baseline metric that we always use to gauge our value in public transit. So we need to improve that technology, or get that better technology out there. I am always concerned with how our traditional, let's get down on our knees and cinch down a bunch of straps so that someone who's a wheelchair user is safely secured in a vehicle, whether it's fixed route transit, paratransit, demand response, what have you. We've got to do something about passenger securement and safety, so that, because many of these passengers have compromised health systems of their own, COVID notwithstanding. And what are we doing from a public health point of view when we're asking our vehicle operators to spend a huge chunk of their time in intimately close proximity with a passenger with a compromised health system, just because of their disability, not because they've got a communicable disease. And so we need to improve that technology. There are ways of doing that. There's some pretty good models out there already, but we really need to spend more attention on that. And we really need to look at, to get back to my other point here, is look at seating and interior configurations. One of the things that at CTA we've heard from hundreds of public transit providers, large urban, medium urban, small urban, rural, tribal, was the recognition that even though we're still all in a public transit mission for every single person in the public in America, the honest to gosh reality was during these times of pandemic, the core user base of public transit, the reason why most public transit systems in urban, small urban, and in rural America are bringing service back up to as full operational status as they possibly can is we're talking about essential workers. We're talking about, much as I hate the phrase, transit dependent folks who really don't have a good alternative to public transit. So for crying out loud, why aren't we designing bus interiors that actually meet the needs of low-income families without cars, or folks who have a mixture of groceries and strollers and wheelchairs, and do that and get that on the bus? Because that essential workforce, they are the ones for whom transit exists in this country right now. And whether it's able-bodied, physically challenged, whatever, old, young, having a driver's license or not, they're the ones that actually need to have safe transportation to and from their jobs. You know, occasionally when I'm out and about talking to folks in grocery stores, I realize that just to pick on one, facet of the economy, the people who are working in grocery stores, they're already half the time are practically fearing for their lives and certainly fearing for their health just by going to work. I hate to say that. It really pains me to say that, but they are. The last thing they need is to be fearing for their lives and their health getting to and from their work because they're using public transit. So let's kind of let's see if we can find ways collectively, all as a network, to be doing better. Okay, so that ends my rant. Let's get back to what we're actually doing at NCAT, the National Center for Applied Transit Technology. As I mentioned, we have the Promising Practices Guide that I've been overseeing, about to come out. We actually have had like a small army of consultants and researchers that have been putting together content and papers and things like that for us. So we've got an upcoming webinar in a couple of weeks on autonomous vehicles in rural and small urban transit. We've got the webinar on October 15th that I'll be organizing around promising practices. We've already had webinars on hydrogen fuel cells, electric vehicles, mobility as a service. We had one featuring Go Vermont with the GTFS Flex. We had a webinar kind of explain the myths and opportunities through open source software. We even had one early on kind of a basic decision-making tree around transit technology. So, and we've got more in the works, to come. We've got, white papers coming out on those topics and more around things like, things like how to adopt electric vehicles in your transit system, how to look at charging infrastructure. Fascinating white paper that I was involved with editing on, working with your electric utilities. I'm surprised that even though electric buses have been around for a number of years now, we've never actually figured out how to help folks work with their electric utility in the same comparable way to how we educated people years ago to work with their natural gas suppliers around CNG and those alternative fuels. So we've got a number of things happening. Too many things to list or to recite in one presentation. So I will say, go to the website. It's ncat.org. There's a little hyphen in there. Otherwise, you go to some other cat of some other in. And like a lot of folks, including our friends at FTA, we have an electronic newsletter that you can subscribe to, that I think it's monthly, you'll get stuff from us about that. And like I said, if you've got questions about these things that I've raised through the day, throw them in the Q&A box, and as time permits, we will respond to those. But that is the end of my presentation. So I will turn it back to our moderators to kind of help move us on to hearing from Michigan DOT.
And I think, I'm going to give Wiley just a second, but I think because of his technical difficulties, I'm going to pinch hit and just hand it off to Janet. Janet, get it going.
Okay, hi, I'm Janet Geisler. I'm the Mobility Innovation Specialist with the Michigan Department of Transportation's Office of Passenger Transportation. So if you skip ahead to the next slide, one more. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the exciting projects that we're doing here in Michigan, and then share a few lessons learned. Next slide. You heard Chris mentioned the Michigan Mobility Challenge, the $8 million Michigan Mobility Challenge. And this is what you get when you have unanticipated state revenues and a governor who was a self-described tech nerd. That was our previous governor, Rick Snyder, and he conceived of this challenge grant that would use technology to solve mobility gaps for seniors, persons with disabilities, and veterans. So it kicked off in the spring of 2018. One of the other goals of the project was to test different types of technology and include all parts of the state. We understood that transit agencies often can't afford to assume the risk of trying out new technology. With pilots, some of them aren't going to work. And so with the state providing this funding, it gave them it helped reduce the risk so that we could try these new things and discover some really exciting potential. So one of the most successful elements of the project was our launch event. That happened, as I said, spring 2018. It was a day-long workshop that brought together transportation providers, technology companies, representatives of and advocates for the target populations. The day started with presentations from each of those groups, and then it split off into breakout groups where each room was hosted by one of the target populations. And some of those rooms were pretty specific. So for example, we didn't have just one room for persons with disabilities. There was a room for persons with hearing impairments and another room for people with cognitive disabilities, things like that. Then the technology companies and the transportation providers traveled from room to room, and they got to hear from the populations about the specific kinds of challenges they have using public transit. And then everybody got to brainstorm solutions and have good discussion about things that might resolve some of these issues. The day was full of lots of networking opportunities and opportunities to build connections and partnerships. So after that event, the RFP was issued. We received over 40 proposals and ultimately selected 13 different projects with awards ranging from $100,000 to $2.1 million. Next slide. So here's some pictures that illustrate some of the projects that we did in that challenge. We'll go around them starting in the upper left corner, working our way clockwise. And this first one, Chris, pay attention. You wanted some less invasive wheelchair securement, and that was one of the projects. The Ann Arbor Transportation Authority had a project for an automated wheelchair securement. So with this technology, a wheelchair user can secure their wheelchair all by themselves just with the push of a button. That gives the rider increased independence, and as we see with COVID, less potential for infection, and it also provides more efficient operation for the transit system because the driver doesn't have to leave their seat, assist the rider, and just moves things a lot more quickly. The next project in the top middle is a technology called Looking Bus. And this uses an application and sensors to help riders locate a particular bus stop. And that's particularly useful for persons with visual disabilities or cognitive disabilities. So they can find their bus stop. Then the sensors communicate with the vehicle that they plan to board. So the bus driver knows that a person is waiting for the bus. It helps ensure that the passenger gets on the correct vehicle if that stop serves multiple routes. And then once they are on the bus, it also notifies the rider when their destination is approaching. The next project is something from Pedestrian. It's an autonomous robot and trailer designed to deliver things like medication and groceries to people who can't use the transit system. With COVID, the use has kind of shifted to some more medical uses, but transit uses still can be developed in the future. And one potential application for something like this, as we're thinking about COVID, it could be used to deliver access to telemedicine for people who don't have internet access in their homes. The next project on the right middle is the Vets to Wellness. That was a regional project that involved 3 counties, and the goal was to increase transportation options for veterans through regional coordination, same-day service, and technology improvements. At the bottom is an autonomous shuttle that was designed by Pratt & Miller Engineering. This was originally intended to shuttle patients around the campus of the Veterans Administration Hospital in Battle Creek. However, during the course of the project, the hospital got new administration and they decided they did not want to test this on their campus. And so they pulled out, and we had to shift gears a little bit, and we moved the demonstration to Western Michigan University. And actually that had a really nice serendipitous effect where students were able to get involved in the project. And there were a couple students with disabilities who were like engineering or computer science majors who got involved. And so they not only gained some really valuable practical work experience helping design these shuttles, but they also were able to provide input and feedback to help make the shuttle more useful for persons with disabilities. Then the final project is Rapid On Demand, which operated in the Grand Rapids area. This was an application and ride-sharing technologies to increase the availability of same-day trip requests, reduce the duration of rides, increase on-time performance. I recently reviewed their final report, and there was a really big improvement in the rate of no-shows and cancellations. So it was really nice to see a project that was so successful. Next slide. So as I said, those are just 6 of the 13 projects, and you can go to our website to get information about all of the projects and the challenge itself. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the NIAS 2020 Michigan Mobility Challenge. NIAS is the North American International Auto Show, also known as the Detroit Auto Show, and that was historically held in January every year. In 2020, it was moving to June, which really opened up new opportunities to expand the show from just the walls of the convention center to really throughout the city of Detroit. That gave them opportunities to do a lot of more exciting things. And one of them was this challenge grant that we came up with. The challenge was to provide automated transportation for 2 types of service. One was a shuttle that would go from the Detroit airport to downtown Detroit, and that would primarily be used to shuttle the media. And the other was a downtown Detroit circulator that would operate during the show itself, and that would be open to the public. Next slide. So this is just a little graphic showing the downtown Detroit circulator. We made awards to 2 vendors for the airport shuttle and 5 vendors for the downtown circulator. And as I said, this is the downtown circulator. You can see the dots on the map representing all kinds of different points of interest in the city that were connected to the auto show. The different routes that 3 of the providers would have. Each of the awards that were made had different type of vehicle, different sizes of vehicles. They were all SAE level 3 through 5, and they had different types of technology and features on each one. Next slide. This is an example of one of the awards, the vehicles that was awarded for the downtown circulator. This one came from Smart Cone. As I said, the vehicles were all different sizes. This is one of the larger ones. I think the smallest one used Hyundai Sonatas that were fitted with AV technology. As I said, each one has different types of innovations in them, different routes, all different features. This is just one of them. Next slide. Another element that we were looking for was a good user experience. Because these vehicles would be used by the general public, we wanted to give them an opportunity to learn something while they were actually riding in something that was really cool. So there had to be a good onboard user experience. So these are pictures from the interiors of some of the vehicles. The user experience included technology demonstrations, MDOT curated content, and marketing information. Next slide. And then the other element of the challenge was a MOS application. This was awarded to Move It, and the application they developed provided information about the auto show, also allows people to schedule trips on the automated vehicles, see when those vehicles are approaching, and it also allows them to connect with other modes such as public transit, Uber, bike share, etc. So this was scheduled for June, and then along comes COVID. So the auto show was canceled for this year. Everything was bumped forward to 2021. And so all these projects will be demonstrated next year. One other thing that happened as a result of the postponement, this Move It application, they're currently working on expanding it to make it broader, to go beyond the confines of the auto show. So it will cover more of the Detroit area and not just during the 2 weeks of the auto show. Next slide. The next project is the Automated Bus Consortium. This is a national project. It's a partnership of 13 state DOTs and transit agencies to develop and test full-size, full-speed, accessible automated buses. This project is led by the consulting firm AECOM, and it was intended to accelerate the development of this kind of technology by creating a larger market for these vehicles. And these vehicles, by the way, will be electric propulsion. So each of the consortium members brought forward 1 to 3 projects for the final selection. We were looking for diversity in the projects to really test this technology in all different climates, different terrains, different types of service such as BRT, depot operations, shuttles, what have you. Michigan is a leader in the consortium. We hosted an industry forum for the manufacturers, technology providers, and the partners. And that event was very similar to the Mobility Challenge kickoff that we had done. Created a lot of networking opportunities and helped us understand what the manufacturers could actually do, and just raised a lot of questions and answers. So it was a very valuable experience. Michigan is also the lead agency for the procurement of these vehicles. We're currently entering the procurement phase where we're working on the specs, and we'll be going out to bid soon. Michigan has 2 projects in this. Each of the other partners has just 1, but Michigan had 2 projects with really unique elements that brought value to the consortium as a whole. One of our projects is a partnership between the Capital Area Transportation Authority and Michigan State University. It will demonstrate these vehicles on 2 routes on MSU's campus. MSU is a leader in AV research, and so that partnership will bring together valuable experience, insight, and evaluation to the project. Our second project is the only rural project in the consortium, and it's in Huron County. If you get out your handy Michigan map, which is your hand, turn it so that it's facing palm up to your face. Huron County is the very tip of Michigan's thumb, very rural area. There's a factory there that was having trouble getting workers. They recruited a bunch of displaced Puerto Ricans who had been affected by Hurricane Maria. So these Puerto Ricans moved to Michigan. They were being housed at a former military barracks. And so we thought a vehicle like this would be a good way to transport the workers from their housing to the factory. As I said, we're entering phase 2, the procurement phase. Unfortunately, again, here comes COVID, and that caused several of the partners to either drop out of the project or hit pause while they address funding issues and other priorities. So we're actively recruiting additional agencies to join the consortium. If anybody is interested, they can contact me, or There should be contact information for AECOM on the website that's listed on this slide, and we can get you information about more about the project, as well as if you're interested in joining us. Next slide. Statewide MOS. MDOT is exploring a statewide MOS project that would enable people anywhere in the state to connect with the available transit options in their area. We're envisioning Michigan funding a very base level app that would really just kind of connect people with the transit agency in the area wherever they are, or wherever they intend to be, if they want to do some trip planning. Then transit agencies can either use grant funding or local funding to purchase additional features on the application that would allow for things like mobile trip planning, online reservations, and fare payment. And so they could offer those in their regions. This is in the pretty early stages. We're preparing to do an RFI to explore all what's out there and determine just where we're going to go with this. Next slide. The CAV corridor. This was just announced a couple weeks ago. And this will be the nation's first autonomous vehicle corridor. It will be about 40 miles long, connecting Detroit and Ann Arbor. It's a public-private partnership involving the state of Michigan, Ford, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, and Cavnu, which is a tech startup. As I said, this has just been announced, so it's very early. It'll be kicking off with a 2-year feasibility study. Next slide. Just very briefly, here are a few more projects. MDOT received a $6.4 million low-no emissions program grant from FTA. We'll be using this to purchase electric vehicles and buses and build charging infrastructure for 6 transit agencies around the state. It syncs very nicely with the Automated Bus Consortium. The 2 transit agencies that are involved in the consortium are also among the 6 in this grant. So they will be able to build their charging infrastructure for the consortium using these grant funds, and use grant funds to either purchase the autonomous vehicles or regular electric buses. We also have a technology partnership with WSP consulting firm. 2 pilots that they're working on with us. In Traverse City, the Bay Area Transportation Authority is working on a vehicle crash avoidance system, and SMART, the transit agency in metropolitan Detroit area, is doing a transit pedestrian detection system. And then finally, we received an IMI grant from FTA. With this, MDOT and BETA, the agency in Traverse City, will develop and demonstrate a mobility on demand service to meet the non-emergency medical transportation needs of rural residents. And it's in conjunction with a larger sandbox demonstration of on-demand microtransit in the area. Next slide. Lessons learned. There have been a lot of them. And one of the biggest lessons, and probably the most important lesson, is to allow enough time to fully develop the partnerships and projects. As I mentioned with the Michigan Mobility Challenge, that launched in the spring of 2018, the governor really wanted to show some results before his term was over that November. So just in a matter of months. That was not feasible. We kind of reeled in his expectations, but the project still was very much on a fast track. And it really didn't allow enough time to fully engage all the appropriate stakeholders. One of the things Chris had mentioned was interoperability, and that's really where some things fell short. For example, we had a project that was designed to improve regional connectivity using an application to connect 3 different counties that had different dispatch systems. The project was to develop an app that would allow all these systems to communicate with one another and let people travel pretty seamlessly among the counties. Where we fell short was nobody involved the dispatch systems. So as they start developing the application and they reach out to the dispatch providers, one says, oh, that sounds good. The second one says, well, you want us to do what? Share our data? That's going to be really expensive. And the third one says, well, that sounds pretty good, but our system uses Excel and we can't handle all this newfangled technology. It's not going to work. So you really have to make sure that you are fully thinking the whole project through, identifying and having discussions with all the appropriate stakeholders. Next, you want to select meaningful metrics. You need to be able to measure things so that you can understand the value and success of the project. You want to monitor milestones throughout and do constant evaluation and change course if needed. As I mentioned, we had to do that with the automated shuttle and moving it from Battle Creek to Western Michigan University. And finally, do plenty of public outreach and marketing in order to educate and gain acceptance. And that's it. The next slide just has my contact information if you want to reach out to me down the road.
Rich?
Yes, sir, you're up.
Okay, I'm back. Well, I can. Okay, I want to thank Janet, Marat, and Chris for the wealth of information that they have provided. Do we have any questions and for discussion at this time, Rich?
Well, let me look at the Q&A.
While Richard's looking it up, I'll kick us off if that's all right, Wiley, with a
Sure,
question.
go ahead.
What does that mean for rural transit agencies in the near future? I would love if a panelist would decide to tackle this.
I think we
Interesting
missed half of what you said, Richard. Why don't you try again?
So the question from Brody Ayers in Colorado, do the panelists believe Uber purchasing route match will become a trend? And if so, what will that mean for rural transit agencies in the near future?
I can jump into that and try to give a little bit of a insight, because we monitor that closely because it's very relevant to what we do. And I think, first of all, it's a great observation, that it is almost like a new trend that we should expect to see more. And the part of that is aligned with our mobility vision that we have. When we say mobility, we try to encompass fixed route transit, paratransit, and other human service transportation, and the private sector activities. So it is, as you can see, the trend is kind of moving towards having everyone, instead of competing, to create an environment where it is more natural for people to have options. That being said, we see the interaction between a private sector entity like Uber and another private sector entity like RouteMatch combining, joining forces. Somewhat of a I don't want to use the word healthy, but it's a good trend, because we will learn more about those partnerships and how they will contribute to the industry. So, in other words, we believe that there is, there's some benefits to it, but as we all know, at initial stages of these type of partnerships and initial stages of research too, we all know this term, the unintended consequences, right? We don't know how that is going to have an effect, and only time will reveal that. So that being said, would that be something that is an ideal model for the future, acquisitions or collaborations or partnerships or teaming? Probably not, because every region has different needs and all that. and what it means to rural transportation is, as I presented a few minutes ago, DART used Uber to outsource their non-emergency medical transportation or their transit operations for cost savings purposes. Do we know the exact value that they brought or what the unintended consequences are? Not really, so time is going to reveal that. But what it means for the rural transportation or transportation areas, capture areas that are not served by fixed route transportation in great detail, then it has benefits. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rumbling a little bit because this is something that is that is not resolved in our minds. But immediately, this is my personal opinion, not DOT's opinion or FDA's opinion. And my personal opinion is that it is interesting that these types of joint ventures or acquisitions are happening because I'm interested to see where they're going to lead and how they're going to complement one another.
And this is Chris. I'm going to chime in with, I guess, my personal opinions, not the official opinions of CTAA on it. We'll all be in full disclosure mode here. I think it's also good to keep it in perspective. When Uber bought out Route Match, I think it caught all of us by surprise, thinking, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen?" And it's too bad that I noticed that Todd Allen from Route Match had been on the participants list and isn't there at the moment, because he could probably answer this better than any of us could speculate. I would say near term, whatever. I mean, so you get, Route Match by Uber instead of Route Match as your software platform. We'll see how things change. Technology always evolves. I think before my own inclination is, before we read too much into what does this mean for transit, it's maybe more interesting to say, well, what does it mean for technology? Whether you like it or not, or agree with them or not, Uber pitches themselves as a technology company that happens to be doing a lot of transportation stuff. We'll also note that during the pandemic, they're making more money off food delivery than off driving people around. So the purchase was probably because there's something in Route Match's platform, some element of code, some algorithmic stuff that is really appealing for Uber's core model, which is kind of app-based, real-time, matching up and optimizing things and people from point A to point B, because that's the core of their what they do. It happens to be moving people, but that's secondary to their long-term vision. So I think the more interesting thing will be to see what happens to the transit marketplace under Uber's Route Match by Uber's software platform, to see, will it follow the example of I think it was Jump Bikes that Uber bought and then offloaded over to Lyft. So I won't hold anything for granted that this means some dramatic phase shift in how the tech industry is viewing our, I hate to say this, tiny little corner of the mobility space. But it is interesting to watch, and I think we should just all kind of stay tuned with interest and hopefully not alarmed to see what happens.
I'll also chime in and let me apologize for my disruptive coworker who was locked in a distant bedroom, but apparently was still making enough noise that you could hear her wanting to get freed from the room she's closed up in. Anyway, with technology, these acquisitions are a matter of course. That was also one of the lessons learned. We had a small startup involved in one of our mobility challenge projects that was purchased by a large international company. And initially that appeared to be a very positive development because they could bring a lot of resources and skill to the project. And it started out that way, but then as we got further down the project, they decided this mobility thing really isn't for them. And they just closed down that whole division, and we were left with software that nobody is willing or able to support. So for better or worse, there will be these kind of changes, and that's part of the adaptability that we have to all be prepared for. We're learning what do we need to add to our contracts as we put these agreements together in case something like this happens down the road. just how do you protect yourself and how do you anticipate changes and how do you roll with the punches as they happen. Some will be very positive, some will be negative, and you just have to go with it.
Well, as it turns out, folks, Todd from RouteMatch was on the phone. Uh, and when I asked him if he wanted me to open his line, miraculously, he dropped off the phone. Who knew? Guess he didn't want to talk. But I can't see him on the phone anymore, so I was going to just open up his line to see if he wanted to comment on it, but no, he's no longer in the participants list. So that's all I have in the way of questions. Murat, I know you had a question or two. Oh, I'm sorry, Don, you were saying.
Yeah, so I did have a question before. I am really interested in the silver linings aspect of the pandemic and presumed associated recession. You know, for example, the use of this type of technology we're using today, while it wasn't perfect, you know, we probably reached hundreds more people than we would have otherwise. We actually had the same exact discussion this morning with when we're talking about how we work with our tribal partners here in Washington State. So I am kind of curious, are there, to ask the panelists, are there things that you see that are actually speeding up because of the pandemic, and either the need is seen as being increased or the ability to move projects forward has somehow been increased?
Oh, I think absolutely. You know, a lot of agencies, technology is very intimidating to them, and so they're slow to get some of these projects off the ground. And with some of the things like the contactless fares, they really felt forced to jump into those. And a lot of the technology providers were providing a lot of these services, at least in a short-term basis, free, essentially letting people do kind of trial demos on things. So that will really help both the agencies and the riders get some real-world experience with these things and make them a little less scary. And I think it will really accelerate some of the adoption of these technologies.
And I'll agree with everything you said, Janet. I think that folks are seeing in all of this the silver lining of, oh, we really need to take a fresh look at how we're doing what we're doing, or even how do we define what it is we're in the business of doing. I think that for instance, I'm hearing a lot of interest from CTA's members across the country of just curiosity around mobility as a service, curiosity around whatever it is we mean by my microtransit, that kind of stuff, curiosity about how can we best do kind of real-time, in the moment demand response transit, you know, scheduling and dispatching, because what they're seeing is that, you know, there's been huge economic disruption already, and no one really knows how this is all going to play out. And we can all speculate, but we don't really know. But this notion is that however things start to return in transit providers' communities, it's going to be, even if it's not physically different, it's going to feel different than it was before. So how do we respond to that? So I'm hearing things like, how do we market our transit system? How do we even bother serving certain parts of town where there's currently, for the last 6 months, been no interest in transit, because that element that may have been core to our workforce is really not even there anymore. And also, I think especially, I mean, the biggest picture issues that we're seeing at CTA are looking at places where transit is a key partner with major employers or major facilities like universities. Because again, you look at higher education right now as they're trying to get a fall semester started or not, huge disruption on every level. Transit providers that happen to be in university communities, like, you know, they're like collateral damage. I mean, they're really not part of the key conversation, but severely influenced by what goes on there, either for revenue sake, for ridership sake, or what have you. I think that, like I said in my spiel earlier, I think that if we look at things like, oh, we need to pay more attention to who's on the bus. We might have to do contact tracing. We might need to worry about the presumed health or non-health of the passenger, and so forth. So I think there are a lot of service delivery things that are out there. And the final thing I'll add to that is, like, I'm spending half my time working with in a state where the state's using some of its CARES money to start up an all-new small urban transit program. And I know of a couple other states where that's the case, where places that, urbanized areas that have not had transit in decades actually now are seeing, oh, we need transit, and what kind of transit do we need that is kind of responsive to the community in this post-pandemic environment? So it is a fascinating time, and I hate to think that we're profiting off so much suffering and so much disruption, but on the other hand, looking at the opportunity to take a fresh look. I mean, it almost makes me think of like what was happening with transportation when diesel and gasoline and some steam and battery powered vehicles started to supplant horse-drawn vehicles, a little over a century ago. It's not going to be that dramatic this time around, but still it's that chance to take a fresh look at like what's being done and why, and what does the community need? I'm hearing a lot of transit providers that are paying a lot more attention to bike ped infrastructure because they're saying, oh, we need to kind of paraphrase Rick's earlier point, we need to look at the complete trip. And so a lot of those complete trips, those, the folks that are using our buses can do it on their own if we just give them decent sidewalks. Maybe that's a more cost-effective thing to do than to take a 40-foot transit coach with 3 people on it and run that route just because there's no sidewalk.
So let me go back to the panelists, and I'm going to ask this one question. Give me your quickest answer as possible, but I have a question from Mr. Charles Carr, Mississippi DOT. How can technology be used to rebuild consumers' trust in transit? 30 seconds. Just one panelist, please take that question.
I'll start. Lots of push notifications to the public.
How about FTA?
I want to give a general answer. Push to contactless technologies, touchless technologies as the first immediate low-hanging fruit.
And
Janet?
to Chris's other points,
Oh,
what we can do to bring other options to bear that fit those needs at the appropriate scale and place.
Janet?
I guess a combination of using things like social media and push notifications to educate the public about the things that transit is adapting and adopting, be it contactless fares, disinfecting technology, ultraviolet light, disinfection, all the different things that they're using to make it safe.
Fantastic. So now before I pass this back off to Don for sort of concluding remarks, I just want to say also from our perspective, from AASHTO's perspective, thank you everybody for this great conversation. We're going to find this very helpful because just so you know, AASHTO is forming a working group on the topic of shared mobility, MOS and MOD, and we're going to continue this discussion in the coming months. So stay tuned. We might be doing many more of these sessions and asking for your input and for your contributions to what we expect to be policy on these topics. And so thank you again. So now, Don, I'll kick it back to you and let you take us out.
Thanks, Richard. My stomach is just letting me know that here on the West Coast, we're well into lunchtime. And so it's time for us to go on to the next. So I want to reiterate, thank you all to the panelists. Thank you to Richard and everyone at AASHTO who helped put this together. I think it is great. I mentioned that it's kind of the silver linings aspect that we're getting used to this technology. We're all still learning. We're all working the bugs out, but we reached a lot more people over the last 2 weeks than we would have reached any other way. I think, I'm glad that Chris put up his headshot because I think he wins the award for best headshot out of anybody. It looks like a book author jacket photo. So congrats to him. I miss seeing all of you in person. I suspect that we'll never go all the way back to the amount of travel that we used to do, but I do look forward to the day when we all can get back together in person. I encourage all of the members of MTAP to attend our upcoming meetings. We've got some work to do in areas of work planning, research, and figuring out what to do with our winter meeting. And so with that, thanks again, and I wish you all a farewell.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Richard.